Welcome to the Life After Sugar podcast, the podcast that's not just about sugar, but about your relationship with it and also with food and especially with yourself. So if you want to discover your life after sugar and hear inspiring stories from all kinds of people who also cut out sugar in their way, at their pace, for their own reasons, this is the podcast for you. Because when you take away the sugar, you can finally discover the real sweetness in your life. I'm your host, Netta Gorman, and today I'm talking with Dr. Vera Tarman, who's the author of the book Food Junkies, as well as the presenter of the podcast of the same name. The way that Dr. Vera Tarman talks about food addiction in her book is so touching and so real because it's based on her personal clinical experience about herself and her patients who cope with compulsive overeating problems, binge eating, obesity, anorexia, and bulimia. Food Junkies tackles the complex and very often poorly understood issue of food addiction, but from the perspective of a medical researcher and, of course, dozens of her patients. When I first reached out to Dr. Vera Tarman, I wanted to know the story behind the white coat, her story. Just before we get into our chat, I want to invite you to download your own simple guide to getting more energy with less sugar on my website, aftersugarclub.com. Just click on the tab Simple Guide to download it. And you can also get my 5 tips to help you with sugar cravings. That's on the podcast page on aftersugarclub.com. Click on the tab Podcast and download my 5 tips to help you with sugar cravings. And if you're ready and committed to really break free from sugar, then join us in the After Sugar Club. Go to aftersugarclub.com and click on the green button, Join the Club. You can also come say hi on my Facebook page, Life After Sugar, and on my Instagram account at My Life After Sugar, which is where I post pictures of what I eat, and you'll see that it's absolutely possible to live an active and fun life, even if you don't eat sugar. So here's my chat with Dr. Vera Tarman.
So I've listened to a few of your podcasts, and I got the sense that you do sort of talk behind the scenes about the people and the personal story. So I thought I often just allude to that quickly in my various ventures, but not in a lot of detail. So I can do a little bit of that now. I've been working in this field of food addiction for I think probably 15 years or something like that, maybe between 15 and 20 years professionally. And I have a sort of personal story behind the passion that keeps me going because it's, I'm not making any money out of this. I don't even want to practice out of this. Like a lot of people will email me and say, can you help me? Can I be your patient? And unlike in the States where people do stuff like this as a kind of self-promotion, for me, really, it is just, I guess I want to promote my book, but that's really just to promote the message. So what keeps me going is a desire to pass the message on and to keep the message going, because I think it's an important message. And one of the things I've discovered in the podcast is that I have, even though I've felt alone for many years, in fact, there have been many people feeling alone in all pockets of various cities doing very much the same thing. So, this is the era of where we're actually discovering each other thanks to Zoom and stuff like that. But in my early days, I felt very much alone and just felt like it was my passion to get the message out that kept me going. And the reason why I had that passion is because I, like so many people, young women, and I knew that I was like many young women at that time, I just didn't have a name for it, really struggled with my eating behavior and my weight. Because, if you're a woman, you're aware of your weight. Like it's just comes with the territory. It doesn't matter what you look like.
It absolutely does. Yes.
Yeah, and early days, like when I was young, like 14, 15, I was actually quite small for my age because I just was in an environment, a home environment where food was not part. It was like my parents put the food on the table and I didn't have any money, so it just wasn't a way for me to abuse it other than at Halloween and Christmas and stuff like that. So I always knew that I liked food, but it wasn't really a venue until I left home in my teens. And I struggle with, am I really first an alcoholic? Am I really first a food addict? I don't really know, because they all sort of came on the same scene. And
were you aware that you had some sort of dependent relationship with alcohol or food in your teens?
Yeah, absolutely. And I remember when I was like 17 years old, feeling very proud that I had discovered, like so many of us, we don't know how to live life. And I remember thinking, I found cigarettes, smoking, and I found coffee, and I found food in the form of cheeseburgers. That was my thing. And I remember thinking, I've got the answer now. I know how to cope. I have my my coffee, my cigarette, my cheeseburger, and then I was just discovering alcohol and pot. And that was at that point still just, it was a way to socialize with people. But that sense of I need this to get by, I felt very proud. I'd found the tool to survive.
And can I ask you what it was that you felt that you need to cope with?
Just the anxieties of, moving into the world. In my earlier years, I thought I was an introvert. I actually don't think I am. I think I'm an extrovert. But for many years, I thought I was an introvert, and I was a book reader. So it's read, and was alone a lot of the time. It's very easy to be alone and read books. So when I moved out into the world, like, how do I be with these people? I didn't know how to do that. So found these coffee, cigarettes and whatnot. And I kind of was able to manage as a teenager, because that's a hard time, to be in the world. And then I found out fairly quickly that alcohol was, I do think I have an addictive streak. And I found that alcohol just, I couldn't cope. I couldn't drink and cope. So I had to stop. And I had to stop. I discovered that after 2 years of being in university and just living a life that was very isolated. I had a place in residence where you were supposed to share a room always with somebody. But I was the one kid that had my own room because I had problems. It's funny now.
And was it you that sort of identified that you had problems, or was it identified for you?
I think I recognized it. But, the thing that I always thought is, it's not a problem. It's just me. This is who I am. And I don't know if that's a problem, but it's just me. I didn't have words like that until, much later. But I knew that smoking pot and drinking, there was just no way I could work. And I was very ambitious because I come from an immigrant background, and we were very much like, we came to Canada to make good. And so I knew that I couldn't be ambitious and also do these behaviors. So I stopped them. But then what happened is food suddenly became ever more enticing than it ever was before. And that was like a shock, because until then I knew alcohol, puts me, like literally cutting myself and, behaviors that I knew were not good, but I still felt I had some agency. But when I stopped all of that and then started to struggle with my food, either restricting or overeating, it just felt like something was bigger than me in a way that I had not. It was. I just remember sometimes sitting on my bed in the residence, going, "I don't understand this. What is this thing? It's like this monster would take over inside of me," which I talk about in the book as this. Bitten Johnson talks about, the red dog. To me, it just felt like a breathing, nasty monster inside that would take over. And so I struggled with that. And it seemed to get worse and worse the more I struggled, to the point where I literally, I mean, this is in the 70s when even the words eating disorder were fairly new. And now, if I walked in with my symptoms, I would have said, yeah, she has bulimia. But I didn't know then. I just knew that I was just really, something weird was happening with me. And I even
can you explain to us a bit about what it was, what your behaviors actually translated into?
Well, it was like, first of all, it felt like I was in a hornet's nest all the time. And the hornets were these thoughts, which were, how many calories have you had today? Okay, you've had 900. That's perfect. Well, then, you know, can you just, and you can still have another 100. What can you do? And I would say, no, please leave me alone. It's, 11 o'clock at night. I've got to go to bed. Well, just have that 1100 calories. And so then I would go downstairs to the vending machine and have 600 calories, 3 chocolate bars or something. And then it would be, how can you get rid of those? Can you go out, get up earlier in the morning and run? Like, it's like the thoughts would just, it was like a sting, like a hornet's nest. And they just wouldn't go away. And so my behavior would be that I would be eating, or sitting with my calculator. We had manual calculators then, figuring out the calories, or going down to the vending machine, looking at the machines, eating them, or throwing them up. Like it was always one of those things. And the idea of rest in between, there were times when I would sit and I would think, wouldn't it be nice to just sit and not think anything, like nothing. Because
that peace in your head.
Yeah, like even just 5 minutes, because the moment there would be a pause button, another one of those hornets would just find its way in. So that I went to the emergency at one point when I'd had enough, like at the local psych ward. And I said, I don't know what's wrong with me, but I'm obsessed about food. And I remember an intern came down, I had to tell a whole story, and then another person came down, and then they eventually said at like 2 a.m, okay, you can go. And I said, no, I can't go. I'm here because if I go home, I'm going to binge and purge for the rest of the night, and I can't do that. Anyway, they let me go, and of course I did that. And then I ended up doing behaviors like hanging out with people that I did not want to hang out with, just so that I would not be on my own, and like just so that I wouldn't be alone. And
the kind of out of the frying pan into the fire kind.
Yeah.
How old were you at this point?
I was at this point I was about 18 or 19, something like that.
At university?
Yes, at university. Yeah.
What were you studying at university?
At that point I was studying for an English degree. So because I was a reader, I loved reading, and it was just great. Science and all that didn't come until much later. And then I heard about going to England to, travel, because that was the thing we did in the 70s. We traveled. And my goal was one day I'm going to go to India and I'm going to go to England. And I thought the geographical cure, I'm going to be so busy meeting so many people, getting hostels, doing this, I won't have time to eat. That didn't happen at all. I got to England, was given was working in a hotel. I was given a hotel room with somebody else. That didn't matter. I found the stairwell, and I just figured out how to work around that. And I would walk the streets at night thinking I can't go home because then I'll do this binge purging thing. Anyway, so it was just misery.
Did you feel that you were stuck, that there was nothing to be done?
Yeah, well, I kept trying, and I would think, okay, I'll just give in. Well, I would stop because what happened is my weight, which was always, like I said, sort of on the smaller side, stopped being on. It was like my weight now. And then I started to gain a little bit more, and I was getting more worried. And of course, the more worried I got, the more obsessed. And then that whole cycle got even worse. And we all know you gain weight by multiple diets. That's what happened to me. And there was a point at which I said, you just got to stop the diet and just become as fat as whatever's going to happen. Well, then that is what happened. The weight didn't stop. And it's like, come on, it's got to stop at some point. But it didn't, because I was just, I don't know, so obsessed.
So how did that go? How many years did it take for you to put on the weight that you put on?
I think probably I gained like, I mean, I ultimately gained 100 pounds more than I am now. I think probably I gained about 50 pounds in that whole process. I was also running all the time, and I, of course, was throwing up all the time. I got to be very good at that. And really, like, life for a long time was, even when I went to India, because I thought that would do it too. That didn't do it. I just found I could eat chapati and banana. I could find ways to get around it. Yeah, yeah. I would sort of narrow it down to maybe 3 or 4 binges and purges, and that would get me through a night, which is just unpleasant. And my weight, like I said, 50, 60 pounds. When I finally got into medical school, fast forward further ahead, and started eating that food, which was just like French fries, and I don't know. I mean, I remember thinking, because I didn't know this stuff very well, I remember thinking, if it's in a hospital, if it's being offered by a medical school, it's got to be okay.
So yeah, that's got to be the biggest irony ever.
I know. And that's when I gained most of my weight, was in medical school, because I thought, well, okay. And plus I was studying all the time, and I wasn't able to run, and I didn't want to do the whole throwing up thing. So by the time, I was, 100 pounds more. Plus I'd found a partner who loved to bake, and, would every week would bake me 1 or 2 cakes in the week. Like that would be the Friday night and the Sunday night treat.
And that's not self-sabotage at all.
No.
So listen, so you're in med school.
Yeah.
And did they teach you at med school how human biology works and the metabolism?
Oh, no, nothing like that. But I mean, I was in med school, like just preliminary, like just the chemistry and biology and stuff. So that would have been more appropriate, I guess, during internship or in clinical work, of which I learned nothing there either. But I wasn't really expecting to there. I was just, there was so much to do that the idea of going out to run or do anything like that was like, forget it, I have to study. Plus I had an English background. I didn't have a science background. And I was invited to go into a school where you didn't have to have an English background, but you had to show that you were willing to, make up by doing extra work. So that's—
You mean you didn't have to have a scientific background, you mean?
No, you didn't. But you had to work harder, which I was able to demonstrate through other things that I did that I would be willing to do. So I did. And I remembered that, in high school, I loved biology, but I didn't have any idea about medical school at that point.
But I mean, in med school, we would think from the outside looking in that what you actually learn about is human biology. Mm-hmm. And that you would, at some point, somebody would teach you that, eating less and running more is not going to do it.
Oh, yeah, but we're not even doing that today. Like, that's not even happening today. This is the thing that we're fighting about in our podcasts and in our books. And, it's what people are saying, including our leaders like, Robert Lustig and Gary Tobes. It's like, it's so obvious now in the science, but in the medical schools, it's still being taught the other way. I'm still butting heads with GPs that are coming out with this belief that it's, calories in and calories out. Yeah. But it certainly wasn't happening then.
It takes us English teachers to put things straight, I guess.
Yeah. I think that if there was an acknowledgement of disordered eating, it was all coming from the eating disorder model, which was just figure out what your problem is and cut down. And of course, that never worked.
Of course, yeah. So here you were demonstrating these behaviors of what we today, or you today know was an eating disorder, but it wasn't recognized as such. It just wasn't on anyone's radar. How did you get from having these behaviors, not really knowing how to identify them, to actually putting your finger on it and saying, hey, wait a minute, this is what I've got?
So I had, one of the things that I think probably most professionals learn to do is really diversify or compartmentalize. So that here's a person with a problem, here's me, there's no commonality, I'm listening with my white coat, and I'm listening to you, but I'm not recognizing that there's any behavior. And the stuff like the Vera that I was disgusted by and ashamed by didn't walk into the waiting room or the office. It was somewhere in the back, in the dark, late at night when I was by myself, which is of course not true, but that's how it seemed. And there would be times when I would look at myself in, like, there might be a mirror in the waiting room going to get a patient, thinking, how can I be telling this person to do these things that I am not doing myself? And it would be like this little blip of awareness, and then it was gone. So I, for a long time, felt disgust, but it was private. And it was, like I said, scheduled for night. And I had very difficult time sleeping, insomnia problem. But it wasn't until I got into, I worked in the HIV field for almost 10 years. And I really loved that work. And it was, I put a lot of passion into that work, and that break between professional and private was very clear. And then when that kind of ended, I got into the addiction field because I didn't want to do general medicine. It's just too slow moving, and I like the stuff that was more, I guess, drama. We like drama.
Oh, of course. You got to have some drama, especially if you're binging and purging.
Yeah. And I recognize my behavior in clients more and more as I saw more and more people with addiction. And I'm still all this time trying to control, but sort of not really thinking I will. Or what I would do is I'd find control for a few months, and then I'd lose it. And then I just accepted that was life. I'd be on a good spin, and then on a bad one, a bad, slip. And then
Can I ask you, what would trigger the bad part, the bad spin?
Just that the good didn't last that long. Like, it might just be a slightly bad day, and I'm managing on like maybe 3 or 4 binge purges, or maybe just a tub of Haagen-Dazs, and that's enough. Ice cream in a night, or a certain amount of candy and cake, and then I would need more, and then it would just. It didn't take much. It was like almost like a few months, and then I somehow knew it wouldn't last, and then I have to find something else. And it was a constant juggle. It felt like I was juggling all the time. And this was part of the story of Vera. At this point, I guess I could have said by now it's bulimia, but I wasn't interested in going to get help, because again, this was my night problem, not my day problem. And there's no way I'm going to go in the day and see clinicians that I know. Like, no way, no thank you.
Yeah, because you were in this position of being a white coat.
Yes,
right?
exactly.
You're supposed to be sort of untouchable, perfect.
Yeah.
You've got it all together.
And there is a group for doctors who are in trouble, in all of the colleges. But they were the ones with problems. That wasn't going to be me. But it was one day, like, my aha moment is when it wasn't so much what's my problem, it was what's the solution, because I'm forever coming up with a new idea. It's going to be popcorn, it's going to be muffins, it's going to be Starbucks lattes, and that's like, it'll be something for a few months. And one day I just thought, I remember a while ago when I was doing nothing, no sugar at all. I was really good for like 6 months. I was smoking pot because I would do something. And then my partner came into the room with some sweet, and I said, oh, you better not have that there. And she said, okay, I won't. But then I had a little bit, and then I was back slipping again. And I remembered that, and I thought, I'm going to treat this like I tell my patients to treat this like an addiction. That was my aha moment. I'm just going to try this as a trial because it worked. I don't know why, those many tries ago for 6 months, and it worked. And
for you to say to yourself, I'm going to treat this as an addiction, just like I do with my patients.
Yeah.
I mean, I find that required of you a lot of humility.
Yeah, but that dark part of me was, how can I be arrogant when I'm like throwing up? That's not where my pride is. My pride was in the day with the white coat. This was the disgusting part of me, and I was willing to do anything. Like, that was but it really was very compartmentalized, or whatever the word is.
Compartmentalized, yeah, for your two
Yeah.
identities.
Yeah.
About how old were you when you had this
I think
moment?
I was like in my 40s then, and then that I was good with that. I knew I couldn't have sugar, but what ended up happening is I ended up drinking, because I also knew, like, I would do those. I would be clean for a while of alcohol, and then I would slip because I go, oh, what's the point? It doesn't matter. And I remember drinking at a party, and then the food was right in my face, and I couldn't say no. So then that sort of told me, oh my God. These are the same thing, because I do this and I'm going to want this. And so I figured, as much as I didn't want to, I'd have to, if I wanted to stop sugar as this trial, I'd also have to stop alcohol. And so I did that for quite a while, until I think, yeah, I did that. And then there was I don't know, maybe a year that I had quit sugar. And then the desire to drink again became really strong, stronger than it had been before. I just began to see that the line was blurred. It really was blurred.
Between sugar and alcohol.
And sugar and alcohol, and same with pot. And I was lucky. I consider myself very lucky now that I was in a generation where it wasn't that easy for me to get cocaine or opiates, not like it is today, or I would have done those too. But that would have required an extra effort that I didn't want to do because I was too busy with school and all the rest of it. But I really am very grateful, because I think I could have easily gone into that. But my experience, and then seeing it with my patients, that it's all the same thing. I just became convinced over this experimental period of like, maybe the whole thing lasted about a year. And then I started to, because I'm thinking about it from an addiction point of view, hear about 12-step. And so then I looked into some of them. I didn't like OA, because when I went to those meetings, I mean, I was messed up, but at least what I was doing was working. The meetings that I went to, people were not, I guess we say now, they were still in their disease. So they didn't have what I wanted. Now I know you have to shop around. I didn't know that then. I thought an OA meeting is an OA meeting. Now I know, no, you got to go to the right one, like where there's recovery. But I heard about another one called Food Addicts Anonymous, and they had taken out flour as well as sugar. And that made me think, well, the theory makes sense. And I don't know how I'm not going to eat flour. That means no muffins. That means no. And, you know, I used to think eating muffins was way better than eating ice cream.
Yeah.
A little better, but not much.
Not much.
But it made a big difference to quit the flour. And that just made, I guess from then on, the desire to keep on this path, I became more committed to. And then finally, I crossed on 2008. Now I'm getting into addiction as I mean, HIV was now becoming more and more of a specialty among specialists, as opposed to anybody who was willing to work in that field. I mean, I was there when we were like, there were so many of us, and we were going to people's homes, and anyway, it became a specialized field, and that wasn't me. I started to specialize in addiction, and that's when I came across Nora Volkow's writing, So the Science. And she started, I think that was a seminal article in 2006 or 2008 about addiction as, or that we can be addicted to food, like the same pathways. And then I came across Nicole Lavina's work a few years later, and it was like, okay, now I've got my science. And as long as, you know, it's like Bill W. I don't know if I'm going to help anybody, but while I'm on the pathway of speaking this way, it's keeping me clean.
Fantastic. And you're not alone anymore either, right? There were others that were studying this and recognizing food addiction as actually being a thing.
Yes, well, but yes, they were. At that point, it was still not food addiction per se, but addictiveness of food. And yes. But to actually see it as a clinical syndrome, I think people still struggle with that now. But because I worked in the field of addiction and saw addiction like alcohol and cocaine, I could say there is a condition that's called food addiction, and it has the same progressive nature as, like, I think I went beyond just it's addictive, but you become an addict with all of the other features.
Yeah, and I'm reading Michael Moss's new book, Hooked.
Yes.
Which tells the history of addiction, of food addiction.
Yeah.
And it's part of it is saying that not everyone becomes addicted to food. So that food can be addictive,
yes,
but we're not all with that kind of addictive personality.
Exactly.
Is that what you found in your clinical experience?
Yes. And he very openly says he's not one of them, one of us. And I know very, very well through my own experience that I am one of us. And I know I'm not a bulimic because it's not about the emotional. I can be super happy. It doesn't matter what. If I have it, I'm going to want it. And so I have to protect it doesn't matter what my mood is. And I remember I actually went to in my internship, there was no food addiction program to check out, but there was eating disorder program to check out. Excuse me. And I remember saying to the social worker, you're asking people to eat dessert at night and they're telling you they don't want to. And you're telling them, yes, you have to, because we want you to normalize this stuff. And I said, that would not work for me. And they didn't get it. And that's when I knew that's not me.
That's the everything in moderation approach. And you know, it does work for some people, but what bothers me is that it's given as a one size fits all to everyone. It doesn't take into account that we're all different.
Exactly. It does not, no.
And it negates our reality.
Yeah.
You know, and it's so annoying. It really frustrates me because they're supposed to be the food experts, and yet they're negating such a huge part of the population.
Yes, that's right. Yeah. And you know, those many years ago when I went to that psychiatric ward saying, please let me in, because I don't want to be left to my own devices. They did actually hook me up with a psychiatrist or therapist, I think, that I went to before I went to England to do my geographical cure. And I just remember thinking, this is not helping at all, not at all, because it wasn't about the psychic dynamic.
And not only not helping, but sometimes actively hindering.
Yes. What I needed was for somebody to say, here's what you can eat. Let's figure out what's safe and what's not safe. And you go and come back next week and tell me how you did with that.
Yeah. And something for you rather than here's a pyramid. Let's fit you inside it.
Yeah. So that's my sort of personal story, and it's just continued. You know, since then, since I discovered that no sugar and no flour worked better for me, in the last 5 or 6 years, I came across another 12-step program, which also said no grains. And when I tried that, that was even better. It feels more restrictive, but in fact, it's not more restrictive.
Well, it's more liberating in my experience.
Yes. So that's sort of where I am today. And I'm aware that as I get older, I'm cutting more dairy out than ever. I think I eat very little now, and I'll probably cut that out at some point because I'm getting older and we become more sensitized, and I just got to go with it. But this is still much better than that rutting creature. I felt like there was this boar, this pig inside. I mean, some people say it's not very nice, but it's felt like turn the lights off and I'm left with this creature inside me, which is pawing the earth, and it's not pleasant. Anyway, that thing is sleeping dormant.
Fantastic. Yes, you put him to sleep by not feeding him.
Exactly. Yeah.
And at what point in your journey did you write your book?
That was, the first, it's in its second edition. So the first edition, I think, was 2014 or 15. So we're looking at now, I guess 8 years ago. And the book, I started speaking out. Like I said, I've been doing this for about 15 years. I guess it's not longer than 15. Maybe a couple of years before, so maybe about 10 years ago, I had Norma Volko's article and a few others, and I was sort of standing on the street side shouting to whoever would listen to me. Literally, it wasn't the street side, but like a community center, talking to libraries where there's maybe 8 people in the damn audience, whatever it took. I had to do this. But people would say to me more when I would bemoan the fact that, why aren't people listening? You got to write a book. You got to write a book. I said, I'm an English initial, my first degree is, I know it's not easy to write a book. Like, you don't just write a book.
You don't, no.
I got a full practice. I'm busy. I can't. Anyway, I got convinced that I had to write a book because that's what would make people listen. And so I knew of a couple of people who from the Food Institute, Food Addiction Institute in the States, who were researchers who knew the research, spoke with them, and they sort of helped gather, because I needed research, obviously, to synthesize. And I'm a good synthesizer. So I sort of sat down and started to write the clinical knowledge that I had and applied the synthesis. And it took, with the help of research that had already been done, about a year to write. But that was not an easy year. Like, I wouldn't want to write a second book.
I totally get it. I mean, it's a much bigger undertaking, writing a book than you would ever imagine.
I know writing a book is full-time work. And if anyone says it's not, then they're not, I mean, it's more than just putting words to page. As you can tell, so many self-published books are not well written, because they need to be edited well, they need to be all that kind of stuff. Absolutely. And I spent a long time trying to get publishers interested in the book, and I almost got a bite from I think it was Random House, which is a big name in like Toronto division of Random House, and then which was great. I was thrilled, that I got this interview. And then at the end of the interview, they said, we'll talk to you later, after I gave my pitch. And then they said, this is a niche topic. It's just not enough of an audience.
What?
Which I thought, how is that possible? Every woman worries about her weight.
Yes.
And in the food that we're eating today, how many of us are addicted? It's not niche, but I didn't know the words, and I don't know if that would still be the case now. But anyway, I found a publisher in Canada that was willing to take it, thanks to a very good agent, that was willing to take a chance. So I didn't have to self-publish. And I consider that to be a grace from God, because it's really hard to get a book published now. Very hard.
Yes, absolutely. What can you tell us the title of your book?
Well, the first version was Food Junkies: The Truth About Food Addiction. And I there was no money to be made. That was a money pit. It's like getting an expensive dog. You put more and more money into it. I had to do all the promo. I had to do all the travel, and again, talking to audiences of 6 and 8 people. And anyway, it's fine. I had the book, and more people started to listen. And then the second edition came out. There weren't that many podcasts. Like, this is a phenomena, I think, really since COVID. We're really seeing a lot of it. But there were TV shows. I had a couple of co-hosted TV shows, which I was lucky to get. And then because of that, the publishers were willing to let me do a second edition. And this one's called Food Junkies: The Recovery from Food Addiction. And they were just, it's a small Canadian publisher. They're not expecting huge sales. But they did say, here's the issue around the cover of the book, because there's all those donuts, and people are always saying, how can you have donuts on your book, which is about food addiction, which is what I told them. I said, you can't do this.
Doesn't make sense.
No. And I actually got hired a couple of photographers, bought pictures from them to say, like, of beautiful grapes. I don't know if you've seen my Facebook page, but it's a really nice picture of strawberries and stuff.
Yes.
Yeah. And I said, can you use this? And they said, no, it's not going to sell. We want the other one.
I mean, it's true that they know what's going to sell. And
I said, it's ironic. It's ironic.
It is ironic. Yet another irony in the whole story.
Yeah.
I mean, I read your book, a couple of years ago, and it made a huge impression on me, because I felt that you, as a medical doctor, got it. Not only do you get it for people who do have addictive behaviors with food, but you also lived it.
Yeah.
And that helps to get it.
Yes, and continue to live it. I mean, I'm willing to say that, this is something, that Vera late at night that's just waiting, it's always there waiting. And as long as I don't feed it, it's an arm's length away. And I'm very aware of that.
Yes. I think it's a very inspiring message to send out to people that kind of may feel guilty or ashamed about how they are, whereas there's hundreds of thousands of us exactly.
Oh my God. Yeah. Yeah. Well, that's the other thing is, as I was speaking more about the book, especially with journalists, they would come and they would be like, oh, this is kind of weird and fun, and let's ask some crazy questions. And the more I talked very seriously about this, the more by the end of the interview, it was almost like a story in itself, a story arc in itself. The person would sort of hang up the phone or say, okay, we're no longer recording. I think I might be a food addict, or I think my wife might be, or something like this. It was as if something, it went from being this kind of crazy thought to, that's what you're talking about. And I think that the more people really listen to this, they're going to recognize it's prevalent.
It's prevalent, and it's nothing to be ashamed of.
Yeah.
And I want to take, like you, we want to take this out of the closet, as it were, and just stop it from being this massive taboo.
Yes, that's right.
Because we're all in our little dark corners thinking we're all alone in this. And yet there's more than hundreds of thousands of us.
Yes, that's right. And, we're all hating ourselves and feeling a lot of shame. And I like to say that it's just our brains responding to a very toxic environment. And, if there's any shame or anger, it should be external to the pushers.
Yeah, to the food industry.
Yeah, the food
absolutely industry. I totally agree with you. Yeah. Well, it's an amazing story to listen to your story. And can you just tell us how the title of your podcast and how people can get in touch with you?
Sure. But let me say, first of all, Netta, thank you so much, because it's podcasts like this that people will like to bust the shame, and to normalize this. And so that people can go, yeah, that is me, or that if that part of me that is me, I don't have to feel ashamed about. And it'll only happen the more we hear it and the more we talk about it this openly. So I thank you for that. How you can find out more about my writing is, well, I've got the Food Junkies Recovery from Food Addiction, which you can find on Amazon easily. I probably shouldn't promote Amazon, but anyway. I have my Facebook page, which is I'm Sweet Enough, Sugar Free for Life, which is free, and please join that. I have the podcast that I'm actually doing with two other wonderful people. It's a team of 3 of us, and it's called Food Junkies. I think just Food Junkies podcast.
Yeah, love that podcast.
Yeah. It's a really good podcast, because they're really good, and I think I'm pretty good, and we get good speakers, and we research and study. This is not just what did you do yesterday? It's a really, I think it's, I've just spent the last week preparing for the one for next week. So I think it's definitely worth listening to. And then I have my webpage, which is addictionsunplugged.com.
Oh, fantastic. I'll put those links with the show. And thank you so much for talking with me.
Yeah.
And a fellow Canadian in Toronto.
Thank you.
And thank you, and keep in touch. Hopefully we'll do another episode down the line.
Yes.
Thank you.
What a fantastic chat with Dr. Vera Tarman. And how rare is it for us to have the inside story from a health professional, from a doctor, who is willing to be vulnerable and figuratively to take off her white coat and to tell us her own story. And in this case, Vera's own story with food addiction, and specifically with sugar and flour. And do join her Facebook group, because she's very active in there and always gives 100% fantastic advice. And read her book, Food Junkies. And if you're like me and you don't necessarily identify yourself as a food addict or a sugar addict, but you know that you have some kind of emotional or unhealthy relationship with sugar, and you want to break free from that and get to a place where you don't even want or miss sugar anymore, and you're committed to your own well-being, then join us in the After Sugar Club. It's a private membership with a monthly subscription and twice monthly check-in calls on Zoom, where you get all the support, the encouragement, and the accountability and guidance that you need to really break free from sugar for good. Go to aftersugarclub.com and click on the button Join the Club. And if you've enjoyed this episode and you find that the Life After Sugar podcast is helping you live your life after sugar with more joy and more fun, then let me know. Rate the podcast and scroll down and leave me a review and let me know how the podcast is helping you. And don't forget to subscribe to the podcast so that you'll receive the episode magically every Sunday. Thank you for listening. That's it for this week. Keep in touch and see you soon for another episode.